Hey, what's going on? Hopefully the alarm doesn't hit as hard in the afternoon as it does in the nighttime. I'm hoping that. Shout out to shout out to all the mods. I see Deshauna and Kristen and Miss Ray and all you guys. Shout out to y'all. Want to send welcome to Sheila. Welcome to you, Sheila. Also want to send a welcome to Mike B. A welcome to Jolanda. And I want to send a shout out to, who was it? Introvertly Next. I saw the comment that you made about Way of Waters, which I actually owe you guys a new Way of Waters. Sorry about that. Oh, lovely Nola. Welcome back. Sorry about that, Double Dragon. I see about the alarm. Restarted your heart briefly. My apologies. I saw that comment from Introvertly Next about Way of Waters, which I owe you guys a Way of Waters. As being a parent always teaches you new things. And my daughter is actually in a class, and she's the youngest one in the class, and there's a lot of boys in the class, and she doesn't know anybody in the class. And she is afraid to go, which reminds me of my childhood and being terrified of going to basketball practice. Not because I was the youngest or there were girls in it. I was just trash. And so I recoiled from having to go be reminded of me being trash. And my wife and I had discussed it. And where I came back around to that is what a incredible opportunity. Welcome, Jason. I see Jason. This is his first live stream. What a wonderful opportunity to begin to instill the idea of focusing on yourself and running your own race. And I'll be damned if that's not applicable and appropriate for me to hear, because how much of the time am I trying to keep up with this one or that one and feeling judged? And even if I apply it to what I'm doing now, feeling like what I have to put out as opposed to what I want to put out, feeling like what I need to comment about as opposed to what I feel compelled to comment about, what I'm moved by. That's what I'm talking about. Running. And that's why I say begin to instill the idea, because it's a long process. Adopting that ideology is a long process. Shout out to Jason. I see he says a 47-year-old Marine Corps veteran. I did see some of the highlights from Trump and Pete Hegseth's meeting and their speech to generals. Trump calls for using U.S. cities as training ground for armed forces. This is from AP News. AP says Trump calls for using U.S. cities as training ground for armed forces in unusual speech to generals. Shout out to AP for that. I saw all the comments about DEI, which is not new. I saw him talking about, U.S. cities, which is not new. In fact, it's so not new. I wonder if we could have had like a warning. I wonder if there was anybody that was warning the public that he had the intention of using the military on U.S. citizens and civilians. If only we had an idea that that's something that, that's wild. Nobody told us nothing about him using the military against civilians. That's crazy. Of course, we have a government shutdown, which is looming. I got to quote myself, man. I swear, when is the window where this administration just lets you reset. I'm sitting here, last night, I made the thumbnail and planned the thumbnail last night. I was going to talk a little government shutdown, and obviously I had some stuff I wanted to say about Jasmine Crockett and her week. And then we get this military meeting, which again, I didn't hear anything new or that I didn't already understand about this administration from this military meeting, but I'm glad to see they were willing to converge so much of our military brass in one place in advance to do a political speech. That's solid. That's solid. Yeah, that's solid. I have a very special guest joining me in a little bit, my man Kyle Clark. I'm very excited to talk to him. Before I do that, I want to, first of all, congratulate you guys. I recorded my new ending. You can tell because I got a haircut. Crispy. Y'all gonna be like, oh, that's why he did the live during the day, because he got a haircut. He just wanted us all to see the lines. I can't confirm or deny that. But I recorded my new ending. September was an incredible month on this channel. An incredible month. Thank you guys for that. Seriously, because I had heard a lot about how treacherous September could be, back to school, all that kind of stuff. It was actually the highest viewed month we've had this year on the channel, which is really dope. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about Jazzy. Where do I want to start? Why don't we start here? So I put out the video a couple days ago about the back and forth between Jasmine Crockett and Laura Loomer, and about how y'all just refuse to behave. Y'all just refuse to be decent about that. You refused. Y'all were like, no. He came with Jazzy. We not have. Y'all refuse to be decent about that. Here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. Jasmine Crockett and her beef with Laura Loomer, to me, highlights why I get so angry when we have these discussions that amount to respectability politics. When we have to look and see Black fatigue trending, or when we have folks in the community talking about how Jasmine Crockett comes across, or how this one speaks and this, that, and the other thing. One of the reasons why I push back so hard is because that is a load that not everybody has to carry. Laura Loomer is a close confidant to the president. Okay? It's a close confidant to the president. He has ceded that she has had input in staffing decisions at high levels to the point of upsetting other members of his cabinet. Yet not only do her actions and her words never reflect negatively on her people, they don't even reflect negatively on him. We are tied to each other. All of us are tied to each other. Whatever one of us does, we all have to hold this L and see people run with that on the timeline, but they get to act a damn fool. And not even the GOP, not the administration, not Trump, nobody has to hold it. Nobody has to hold it. That is exactly why I push back so hard when it comes to this micromanagement and policing of what Black people are doing. That is exactly why. They want to talk about a level playing field. How level is that playing field? How level is that playing field. Not to mention the fact, and I'm going to circle back around to Lauren Boebert later, but not to mention the fact that it's one thing to have this idea of trying to push back against DEI, right? Trying to call out Black folks, LGBTQ folks, older folks, whatever the case may be, for whatever positions they may have achieved in society. That's one thing. When you put that in the mouth of the Laura Loomers of the world, when you put that in the mouth of the Lauren Boeberts of the world, well, then you expose exactly what this is about. It's like I just had that analogy of me being afraid to go to the basketball team, right? Me being afraid to go to basketball practice because I was trash. I just didn't want to be embarrassed to go to basketball practice and everybody know I was trash. Well, I also wasn't the one that was out there talking either. Because why would I say anything to anybody? If I was, what would that prove? The futility of anything that's coming out of my team's mouth. If Reese is talking, well, you know they aren't serious. You know they are deeply unserious if Reese is talking, because we all know he's trash. That would be me. That would be me. Moving forward in Laura Loomer, in Jasmine Crockett news. I made a whole video talking about the Charlie Kirk referendum and the fact that her point when she went on CNN, when asked to explain her vote against it, she talked about her disappointment and how few of her colleagues joined them in voting against it. I had a piece about that, and I brought that back up with regards to Disney and the weight that some people are asked to carry. And I would actually that's always been a pretty big point with me, going all the way back to my ESPN days. I remember talking about Colin Kaepernick and his protests and me lamenting the fact that Black players were always being pressed to weigh in on that, as if nobody else could show any concern or humanity for what's going on with their fellow Americans. So that's been a concern of mine for quite some time, and I appreciate her for giving voice to it. What I would also say is, again, I'm in my Libra season. Y'all know I'm in my Libra season. So I gotta, you know what I mean? I gotta. So the other thing that it makes me consider are the ways in which I am exhibiting allyship for people outside myself and my identified group. And I say that as a nod to the conversation I had with, I believe it was with Foreign, but I say that as a nod to that conversation where I need to make sure that all of my energy can't be deduced down to self-interest. Right? As much as I might be able to make a very legitimate case in pushing back against the marginalization of my community, if it's not in lockstep with wanting to liberate other communities, then it can be deduced down to self-interest, as righteous as that might be. So in the same ways that Jasmine Crockett challenged her colleagues, I need to make sure to challenge myself in those ways as well. Last thing I'll say, because she had a hell of a week, didn't she? Last thing I'll say about Miss Crockett. She pressed Byron Donalds on legislation that he was trying to pass in DC, eliminating some of the leniency that judges can exhibit when sentencing juvenile offenders. As someone who was the recipient of said leniency in Florida, I don't think that I actually pressed that point as firmly as I should have, quite frankly, because the idea of taking away mechanisms of upward mobility that you utilized, not your family, not your friends, you. The idea of taking away mechanisms of upward mobility that you utilize when you get into a position of power exhibits such a nasty quality of character. Just think about that. Just think about the kind of person. It could be, this behavior is not specific to Congress. We see this kind of behavior in society all the time. Okay. My son went into a play date, and he was trying to play with the magnetiles, which is like this new age Legos that they got. They got magnets in the Legos. It's crazy. My son was trying to play with the magnetiles, and he couldn't get the pieces. Like he was having to compete with the other kids to get the pieces. So what my son did is he went and took all the magnetiles and took them over in the corner so he could play with the magnetiles by him. Somebody else's magnetiles, somebody else's toys. He took it to the corner so he could play by himself. Okay. My son is Byron Donalds. My son is Byron Donalds. My son is also 2. We see this behavior exhibited by people all the time, but just at its essence, the level of the disconnect that you have to exhibit from who you were and the people that were there. Not just your family of origin, but your community of origin, your class of origin, if we want to call it that. And it also exhibits a gross insecurity of the space that you occupy now. Your belonging and their acceptance of you, a gross insecurity of that. And that's no way, that is no way to live. But the idea that we have people governing from that place should be called out whenever that kind of behavior is being exhibited. But moreover, bigger picture, right? Beyond like the left and the right, political football games, right? Beyond that, we talk about like the kind of society that we are creating, the kinds of virtues that we are passing down, I'm deeply concerned about the kinds of behavior that gets rewarded in our society today. And of course, that goes all the way up to the top. But that goes without saying when you're talking about Trump and his behavior. But the trickle down effect of that has us in a lot of spaces, has me at least in a lot of spaces, in a lot of instances, blown away that some of this behavior got off the ground. And it's flying very high in America 2025. It's actually like the exception to lift as you climb, as Jasmine Crockett said in her excoriation of Byron Donalds. That's actually the exception. That was just, in my mind, that's just that's the price of admission. When I was brought up, that was just the price of admission. You are the recipient of all of the blood, sweat, and tears of those that came before you. They didn't do it so you could have a hot tub. Like they didn't do it so you could go to the Bahamas. They did it so you can replicate their work to the best of your ability. We all have different skill sets and whatnot. They did it so you could replicate their work and continue to push the ball forward. And somebody that refused to do so would have been called out and shamed. Now they're elevated. You get to write legislation based on that. And that is the concern that I have beyond left, right? That's the concern that I have for the kind of country that we are shaping right now. Shout out to Jasmine Crockett. She did the damn thing when it comes to that. And I see you guys pushing in the comments. I appreciate you guys' comments. You guys running. Hey, Miss Ray, they running deep in the middle of the afternoon. Okay. Michelle, thank you so much. Much appreciated. If you are a recipient of one of Michelle's gifts, send her some love. Ray, much appreciated. If you receive one of Ray's gifts, send him some love. Nicole, anything to not open the files. Oh, we ain't forgot. We ain't forgot. No, you are correct, Nicole. By the way, I saw the election of Miss Grijalva, I believe in Arizona, being the 218th Democratic vote in the House, and her not being brought into, they're slow walking her being brought into Congress because she could affect the Epstein release. I'm on it. Deshauna, thank you. Shout out to you, Deshauna. Lola, welcome. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, Lola. Jessica, I have a deep love of stand-up and comedy in general. As someone who did stand-up, curious your opinion of those performing at the Riyadh Comedy Festival. Now, Jessica, how you going to ask? Now, actually, I can't even say that because that says 214. Jessica asked that a long ass time ago. My bad, Jessica. Jessica, I certainly don't love it. I would point to the video from yesterday talking about Disney vis-a-vis all of the outlets and entities controlled by right wing in terms of trying to be really thoughtful and purposeful, and where we decide to spend our time and our energy, our talents, I certainly don't love it. I can't say that I've been really like deep into that. However, my other love is sports. And when it comes to sports, I'm old enough to remember, I think it was Live Golf. I'm old enough to remember when Live Golf came out and everybody went crazy talking about sports washing and how amoral it was for people to play on a Live Golf tour. Fast forward a couple years, they done damn near merged with the PGA. They holding live events at the White House. And I believe they had, didn't they put on the Canelo Bud Crawford fight? Didn't they put on that fight? Yeah. The world has shifted. Can't say it's a good shift. It shifted, though. This shutdown is not going to change much. I do find it interesting, the threat of mass firings if the government is in fact shut down. However, the makeup of the federal government is not what it was the last time that they threatened. All my people got laid off. So, hey, it's going to be a whole lot of red hats in the bread line. I can tell you that right now. Oh, boy. Yeah. We'll see. Cheers, Reese. Keep fighting the good fight. This former Colorado, now California girl, loves the progressive message and the Elway shirt. Well, that was a nod to my guest right there. So, we do jerseys, but yeah, I'm deep in Denver, man. I'm deep in Denver. I got a couple Elways. I got a Champ Bailey. I got a Carmelo Anthony. I got a Fat Lever. And I got, David Thompson. Yeah. I'm deep. Yeah. Kristen, thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Lee, fighting at the Ryder Cup. Also on the Universal stage, European team trolling Trump, singing, "Are you watching? We watching RD." I did see there was some Ryder Cup drama. Who was it? Rory McIlroy? Rory McIlroy dropped an anvil on Trump. Mr. Waters, I love all your live videos. Keep it up. Thank you, Araceli. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, without further ado, if you watched my video yesterday, or if you watched the live from last week, or if you've just been following my career, you guys know I used to work down the street at Tegna. And while I was at that company, I know a lot of you guys work at a company and they be like, why can't you be more like Jason? You know what I mean? Why can't you be more like Jason? Jason come on time. He always prepared. I just want you to get to that level. I just need you to get to that level. So the Jason for me was a gentleman by the name of Kyle Clark. Out of Colorado, who you guys may or may not recognize because I've posted and used his content a number of times. So without further ado, the host of Next with Kyle Clark on 9 News in Colorado, my man Kyle Clark. What is going on, sir?
Hey, Reese, what's going on? It's been a long time, man.
It has been, and I appreciate your patience there as I go. Oh, by the way, you did catch the Elway, right?
I did catch the Elway, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
got you.
Nice.
Okay,
I appreciate that.
I'm making sure. So you are in the process of making your show. You have a show tonight, right? You're in the midst of it as a journalist working in 2025, trying to cover everything that I'm trying to capture as well. What has this experience been like for you this year?
It's a good question. I think the key is to not become so overwhelmed that we then make things overwhelming for the audience, right? If folks are tuning into our weeknight program on 9 News in Denver on the NBC affiliate, right, they're looking for clarity, they're looking for context, they're looking for analysis. They're not looking to just feel frantic, right? And I think especially when, folks in and around the Trump administration will acknowledge that part of their strategy is to flood the zone, intense action on so many fronts, right? And they're doing that as a strategy to get people to feel overwhelmed, to not be able to take on a number of things at once, or even just process things. So whether somebody likes Trump, dislikes Trump, I don't know there's anybody who's agnostic on Trump, right? But my goal as a journalist is to just process information and put it in front of people in a digestible way so that they feel empowered and they don't feel overwhelmed.
What is the decision-making process, right? Because I actually was, I seeded the topic choice when I was running my show. And the reason why I did that is because I recognized that I was probably coming from a place of what I had the most to say about, right? Where I could get the most runway. So I ceded to the team just as a kind of nod to what's important to people at large, not just so much like, if I'm deciding what to write a stand-up bit about, it's not necessarily going to be the most pertinent thing to people. It would be the thing that lends itself to a joke. So I ceded those decisions to my team. Now that I'm kind of more or less the team, I have a crew of people that I work with, but I basically make all the content decisions. It's like a difficult balance of like, I see an angle right there, I can really hit that, versus this thing happened, this has to be addressed, this has people deeply concerned. How do you guys manage that balance on your show?
So we're a local program. So everything that we do is through the lens of local, right? It's through the lens of what's happening in Colorado, how it impacts Colorado, where Colorado is at the forefront of these issues. So that primarily is what we're focusing on. And often there will be very pressing national issues that I just don't feel like we necessarily need to speak to because I don't have something Colorado specific to offer. Beyond that, one thing that we do on Next that is not traditional for a local newscast, and you know a bit about doing non-traditional and local news, mainly how it makes people angry. But one thing that we do is that I offer commentary on the program, right? It's not vote for her, vote against him, vote for this, vote against that. It's not that kind of commentary, but it's around shared community values where we think we've got 80-90% of the community that has a shared value, but we can bring it to bear on, say, the conduct of our governor, right? And we'll call out the governor and say, like, is this in line with the man he purports to be and the values that we purport to have as a state, or is that out of whack? And I think about when national news and local news intersect. The day that America was watching what happened in Utah when Charlie Kirk was shot and killed was also the day that two kids got shot on a high school campus outside of Denver. And we headed up there that evening to talk to folks in town and to put the show together, but then also put together a commentary. And I think this speaks to what you were saying, Reese, about like, where do I feel the right to speak? And I spoke that night about the idea that today in America, you had a famous and rich man, personal friend of the president, who was killed. And you had two school kids who were shot. Luckily, they both survived. One of them is going to have terrible, terrible injuries for the rest of his life. But no one is safe in a country in which people think that solving their problems with guns and violence is the way to go. Nobody is safe. Doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter how powerful you are, doesn't matter if you have the ear of the president or if you're just some kid sitting in a school cafeteria. Nobody is safe in that world in which people have the delusion that they're going to solve their problems by shooting people. So not the setup of a joke, the setup of a commentary, but I think that's the balance that we walk, which is when can I say something of value to the community and then try to take those opportunities.
I'm glad that you were there to speak to that directly. I think the point that I made that day was the fact that there was this school shooting that happened the same day. And as I'm watching CNN and all of the national news coverage of the day, I didn't see a scroll. I didn't see a cutaway. I actually was notified that happened by the people in my live told me about that. And I actually was looking up and was looking up articles. And I said, if there's ever an indicator of the normalization of this kind of tragedy, it would be the fact that it doesn't get a mention or a scroll or a cutaway at a time like this.
Well, because we've decided, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, we've decided as a society, or at least a functional majority of the society, that kids getting shot at school is an acceptable price to pay for whatever we don't want to talk about or don't want to deal with. But it's guns, mental health, combination of the two, right? And that kids getting shot in schools is just a thing that happens in America, right? And the news, by definition, is often things that are unusual. And sadly, that's not all that unusual anymore. I don't know. In the local area in Denver, there was some pushback on how much attention Charlie Kirk's killing was getting versus the school shooting. And I encourage folks not to view them as one or the other, and to understand, right, that Charlie Kirk's killing is going to shake the nation on a profound way and could have ripple effects that we have not yet seen, right? And it's not likely that a single school shooting in Colorado, another school shooting in Colorado, is going to have those same ripple effects. But obviously, people in our community are torn apart by this. But to understand that while these situations are different, there is this common thread, which is that we are a country that is awash in easy access to weapons, and there are people who delusionally believe that they're going to solve their problems that way, and they ruin lives. They take lives and they ruin lives.
On a national level, people point, I mean, you just mentioned another school shooting in Colorado. On a national level, people point to Colorado as a place where this happens. You guys hit well above your weight when it comes to the percentage of these things. Why do you think that is? And what is the feeling of Coloradans about that perception and that reality?
I think a lot of it traces back to the Columbine school shooting, because that was the first school shooting that captured America's attention in that way. So I think even if statistically Colorado does not see more school violence than other places, Colorado is always going to be associated with school violence because of what happened at Columbine. I also think the Aurora Theater shooting, not school violence, plays a big part in people's perception about gun violence in Colorado, because that, again, was horrific on a scale that America hadn't witnessed. And also, it was such a relatable tragedy to people because it was a movie theater, right? It was families in a movie theater. And of course, now, every month we tick off another place where we didn't know that a mass shooting could happen, but now that's a place where mass shootings happen. But because Colorado was so intensely associated with violence in schools, then violence against families in a movie theater, I think anytime it does happen in Colorado, the reaction here, as other places, is Colorado again, right? Here we are again. I mean, this particular school district, Jefferson County School District, second largest in the state, they're immediately west of Denver. They have had a number of school shootings just within their own district. They're incredibly proactive about this because of the lessons learned from Columbine. These are the folks who go around the country telling other schools how to better protect their kids.
Wow.
And it happened there again. So it's deeply sad. And also the thing you have to remember is so many people in Colorado have been touched and traumatized by gun violence that anytime this happens, it reopens those wounds in the community. And that's part of the thing that we'll talk about on the local news in terms of, folks, you got to, take care of yourselves. Like, maybe watching this is not the best thing for you right now, because so many people, whether they were in that initial scene or in the rings of connection out in community over the last 30 to 40 years, have been touched by that violence. And every time it happens again, it feels like it's happening to them again.
What do you say in these instances? Because I have a level of freedom now where I don't have to talk about stuff if I don't want to talk about stuff. And actually, the line that I've drawn, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or so. Not like I've been here for a long time, but maybe like 6 months or so, because I could talk about the, pre and post in terms of the mass, shootings and violence that we've seen in America. I did a couple of monologues talking about what needs to happen. And then I'm like, I said the thing. They're not like nothing has, it's just a different city. It's just a different number of people. It's different scenarios. And I feel a little bit, I feel really beaten down by the inaction to the point where I don't have anything new or fresh to say. And it feels like a fool's errand for me to sit here and repeat myself time and time again. So how do you manage that?
It's a good question. I often feel like I have nothing constructive to add in those situations, but I try to talk to people in these communities, listen, just relentlessly ask people, what do you need? What's helpful, what's not helpful, to talk within our newsroom about how our presence after these shootings impacts communities. I think it's widely viewed, at least among journalists, that a lot of the work done by journalists during the Columbine shooting, as it was playing out on live television and then immediately afterwards in the days and weeks that followed, was deeply harmful to that community, was very harmful to the community. Beyond, obviously, the mass tragedy of the killing of a teacher and those students. But that is at the forefront of a lot of our discussions in terms of where do we stand? Who do we talk to? How do we approach people? Do we approach people? How do those stories play out? Because it can be cathartic for folks to share and to talk and to memorialize, but it also can be a means for us to inflict trauma on people as journalists. So I think more than anything, you ask me, what do I say in these moments? Our whole team thinks about, what do we do? What do we do so that we can accurately convey what is happening in this community without adding to the trauma that these families are going through? Because we can absolutely make it worse through our actions. But our goal is to at least be a neutral presence, if not a healing presence. We try to take these opportunities to do good where we can. One of the nice things that we're able to do on our weeknight show is we do a weekly micro-giving campaign. We've done this for 277 weeks now since the lockdown summer of the pandemic. And I find a nonprofit cause somewhere in the state of Colorado that does really good work, right? Not the biggest nonprofit in the world, but not a startup, that just does good, trustworthy work. And I ask people if they give $5, and I match a bunch of those donations and we get this thing rolling. Here we are 5 years later, and this thing is such a force for good. No matter what is in the news, our viewers on any given week raise about $50,000 for a nonprofit in the community. So the shooting in Evergreen happens, and I immediately start conversations with people up there about, listen, I know it's going to be a while before you sort out what your needs and what your wants are, but are there people helping now that we can help? And it turned out there's a nonprofit, the Jefferson Center for Mental Health. They had clinicians, they had staff on the ground that day, working with families, working with kids. They also have infrastructure to help kids deal with trauma long-term in the community. So I said, that's where we're going. That's what we're doing. We know them, we trust them. That's what we're going to do. And we asked folks, would you give? And sure enough, folks in the community donated more than $50,000 just that following week to help out the community of Evergreen for whatever their immediate needs are, and then on beyond. So that's one thing that we try to do with our show, is just, we started with this, Reese, talking about making people feel empowered rather than overwhelmed. The microgiving is a way to do that. Every single week, we do something that hands the power to people in the community to actually make a difference on stories. Now, some people say, as a journalist, that's not your role. You're putting your thumb on your scale. You're getting involved in the community. And I would argue, I don't give up my rights as a citizen or neighbor, American, anything by being a journalist, right? I vote. I care about my community. I want to rally my neighbors to do good where we can. So that was something that we could do. So with all the hurt that was going on, we said, hey, listen, you got a couple bucks, you want to channel it for positive good, this is what we're going to do.
I'm on with Kyle Clark of 9 News. Next with Kyle Clark on 9 News in Colorado. I know that you posted about Kimmel and Disney's decision previously. I'm curious your level of concern as a journalist about the future of your profession and the future of your ability to do it in the ways in which you do, which is very authentic.
So I'll preface this by saying that you had mentioned recently you worked for our parent company, Tegna, there in DC. I've worked for them in Denver for 18 years now. And currently, Tegna is in the process of being acquired by a company called Nexstar, which is one of the largest TV station owners in the country. And that is a process that's playing out in front of the FCC right now. I will be offering no opinions on that. I am happy to talk about kind of the broader situation in terms of journalism. And I'll just tell you, this has been my experience working for Tegna. I think sometimes people associate big company with corporate control, mandates, dictates, you're pushing their agenda, that kind of thing. And I also understand that people's experience can vary, right? By station, by position, that kind of thing. Here in Denver, our team has been able to do some pretty controversial and high profile work over the years, calling out some really powerful people, challenging some powerful institutions, both on the left and the right. And I never once have gotten pressure from our parent company to skew my reporting one way or the other. Their only questions are, is it fair? Is it accurate? You know, sometimes they'll ask, is this going to get us sued? And I was like, well, I can't control what other people are going to do. Anybody can sue anybody. This is America, right? But I can tell you that the work is fair and it's accurate and it's careful. And they say, go for it. My understanding, based on people who work at other media companies around the country, is that it doesn't always work like that. We certainly saw years ago when a media company called Sinclair, another one of the companies that took Jimmy Kimmel off the air, forced its anchors in a number of markets around the country to read a corporate script about fake news. And they're friends of mine who were forced to read that. And they're folks that I believe left journalism because they were given the choice to read that. And that stuff is devastating because local media is based on the trust that we have in communities. I mean, with all the distrust of media these days, the highest levels of trust still exist in the local media, and it's because we're accountable to people, right? You don't like my report, you're going to see me at the grocery store. You're going to see me at last night's Broncos game. You're going to see me at school drop-off when I'm dropping my girls off for school. We can have a conversation, right? That's tougher with national media. So we're highly accountable. We're highly local. And when companies put words in the mouths of people who have spent decades building trust in local communities, that's deeply dangerous. That's very corrosive stuff. And the other thing that I worry about, honestly, is given the current political environment, how many journalists are self-censoring. They're not walking that story into the boss's office that they think could cause a ruckus or that is going to put them or their boss on the hot seat. And just, you know, they'll choose the path of least resistance. They'll do the easy story. They'll do the simple story. They'll do the non-controversial story, or they'll just both side something, and that's garbage, right? I worry that a lot of journalists are making choices right now that I hope that they're at least acknowledging to themselves are self-censorship, and that's dark stuff.
That's you raise a lot of interesting points, and you know, the anecdote you had about friends at Sinclair, because I myself, you know, the fact that it was Tegna that offered me the opportunity to come in and do my show from ESPN is totally random. I mean, it is and it isn't. Obviously, it was the you know, the folks that were there that saw me and were like, he could come here and do this thing. But there's a Sinclair station here. There's some O&Os here, you know, here in DC where I am. They could have been there and had that opportunity. And I wouldn't have known. I didn't know anything about local news in 2017. I wouldn't have known, you know. So the calculus that I would have done to take that job would have been the exact same. And I could have found myself there, and who knows. But the point that you made about how corrosive it is to put those words in the mouths of local journalists, because as I said yesterday, and kind of putting a cap on the Kimmel story, is that the reason why I find it to be so problematic is because I think people know when they turn on cable news what to expect. You know where you're entering when you turn on Fox News, when you turn on MSNBC. CNN could go any number of ways, but generally when it comes to cable news, you know what you're going to hear. But on local news, the idea is that you're a little bit protected from those partisan echo chambers. So when those start to seep in, that's what becomes the most problematic to me, because people don't have their antenna up when it comes to rhetoric. That's what makes it all the more effective coming out of local news.
Yeah, I think because it's one thing if somebody builds a brand and builds a career on partisanship, ideology, pushing a corporate perspective, whatever else. That's one thing. At least people know what they're getting, right? And that could be cable news, or it could be someplace else. But like you said, it's deeply steeped into cable news down to the channel level, right? You know what you're going to get. To me, it's a very, very different thing when you take somebody who has worked for decades to build trust in a local community by just telling the truth, trying to be accurate, trying to be fair. Not to say that people in the community always love what he or she has to say, but it is what it is. And then somebody comes along and says, now here's your script.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cow. I mean, and then that puts journalists in a difficult position to say, am I going to read it?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to walk out the door? Am I going to push back? What am I going to do? And it's a dangerous game. But I do want to point out, though, I think, and I understand people's skepticism. I love skepticism, right? I'm a journalist. I think some people think that every large company makes their local journalists say things that they don't want to say. And I'm telling you, it's not true. It's not true. Some do, some don't. I mean, there are people that are absolutely convinced that I get my talking points every morning in some email or some bat signal or whatever else. And it's like, well, no, and spend some time with the show and you'll come to realize this, because I change my mind on issues. And, one day I'm complimenting the governor because I think he's made a smart decision on open records law. We had a really bad open records bill that was coming through the legislature. Would have allowed individual people in towns and cities to decide who's a journalist and who's not, and put them in a fast lane. I was like, no, that's bad news. That's bad news. The governor vetoed that. I was like, that's a smart call, right?
Yeah.
But then I'll also take him on, when he's pulling, shifty business around tax rebates and tries to get rid of them. And then when he can't get rid of them, he renames them and pretends like they're his gift to the taxpayer. So call him out, right? So listen, there's no talking points coming from above. We're just trying to call balls and strikes as we see them with the editorial control and flexibility that we have. And I think, I want people in cities and towns across America to be interested in what kind of local control do your journalists have. Are they just reading a script, or are they speaking from their heart? Are they truly taking on power, or are they just doing the easy stuff? Are they just talking about the car crashes and the fires and the murders and that kind of thing, right? All that stuff's important, right? Those things impact people. But that litany of tragedy news model that says that the 10 worst things to happen in town today are the 10 most important things to happen in town today, and that's what we're going to serve you, then weather and sports, and maybe an animal story at the end. Good night. That's not a reflection of life. That litany of tragedy is not a reflection of life. And I would encourage people to support journalists wherever they find them, or go beyond journalists. Just talk about people who are speaking to community, right? That's what you do. That's what I do, just in slightly different ways. Look for people who are authentically sharing what they believe, what they know to be true, who are challenging their own preconceptions, encouraging the community to do the same, and put your eyeballs and your support there, as opposed to the person who just appears to be reading from a script.
Amen to what you just said. And you mentioned journalists, leaving and deciding that they don't want to be a part of that. And we've seen that, 60 Minutes, has just been cycling through people that apparently won't sign off to whatever the new mandates are at 60 Minutes. And whenever I see scenarios like that, and obviously here in DC, there's a litany of examples when it comes to, federal prosecutors and people at the FBI and things just cycling through, not journalists, but just talking about people deciding that they don't want to do the thing they're being asked to do. And when I see instances like that, I have some gratitude that people are deciding to that they do have an option and deciding that they're not going to be controlled in that way. At the same time, it also opens up an avenue for them to bring in people who will do that thing, right? So while I have a little bit of gratitude for the individual, the institution then gives me greater pause because of their ability to continue to push through whatever it was that they wanted to push through. You get what I'm saying?
I do get what you said. Okay, I have so many thoughts on this. Okay, so to that end, there has never been a better time for anybody in America to tell anyone, whether it's the government or an employer or a friend, no, I'm not going to go along with this. That's not my values. That's not my values. And you know what? A lot of times it's not going to stop what's going on. You make that point, right? Because the institution is just going to bring in somebody who's willing to do it. But there's never been a better time to say, you may be able to do it, but you will not launder it through my name and reputation. And then I think the minute that somebody makes that clear, like you said, whether it's a prosecutor, or whether it's a career government service employee, or whether it's a journalist, that sends a strong message to the community about what's going on. Even if they can't take the train off the tracks, everybody then knows what's going on. And I think that that's vitally important. I also think, and there's been a lot of conversation about this recently in media, but it applies to things going on in the government. You were talking earlier about what's currently going on in the military, that surrendering just means that it's going to happen, and they're going to come back and they're going to do it again. Pushing back at least gives people the opportunity to try and slow the roll of whatever is going on. And I think people get this, right? They see these dynamics with their friends, with their family, in their workplaces, or whatever else. The idea of just saying, hold on, stop. I'm not comfortable with that. That's not who we are. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here. You may not stop things, but there's a chance that you will. And at the very least, you will provide an impediment that requires them to replace you with somebody who will. And hopefully that's done in a way that's pretty transparent to the public, so they know what's going on. I would also just add one last thing on this. I do get, though, that the people who are able to walk away and stand on values, that is an exercise in privilege, because it means that they're relatively confident that they're going to be able to feed their family the next week somehow, some way, right?
That's true.
And, and I think there's probably a ton more people in journalism, in government service, in the judiciary, who would walk away but don't feel like they have that safety net. So I would just say somebody staying does not mean that we should assume that they agree with the values that are being foisted upon them, and that we should understand that for every person who walks, there are other people who would like to walk but are unable. And to me, that just, I want to say obligation. I'm going to say obligation. It increases the obligation for people who are able to walk away and stand on values to do so.
Excellent point. It's a very good point. And when it comes to pushing back, one of the things we've seen over the course of the last 6 months, but definitely in the last 2 to 3, is the doubling down on those that do push back, right? A way to try and penalize those that do push back. And in fact, the impetus for me reaching out to you to have you on was actually our space facilities being relocated from Colorado to Alabama, because Colorado as a state did push back against this administration. So which, by the way, that's buried under, so many other stories. It's like Pam Bondi's desk. She got to have the craziest desk imaginable. It's buried
and
in
the Epstein files are still in there somewhere. They're still tucked in somewhere on the desk. Yeah.
Do you think people saw that for what it was? I'm sure they probably did in Colorado, because it was clear and present to everybody in Colorado. Do you think people saw that for what it was? Because that, to me, was, we've crossed so many Rubicons recently, but that was one of them, where it came to, like, state by state, red versus blue, this is how we're going to proceed.
I think with Space Command, there's 2 ways to look at it. One way to look at it is Space Command and where it's going to be located. Colorado Springs or Huntsville, Alabama, has been a political football now through 3 administrations, Trump 1, Biden, Trump 2. And it just kind of goes back and forth based on who's in charge. That's politics to me, right? That kind of is what it is. Did I expect Space Command to be pulled out of Colorado? 100%. Absolutely. Because it had gone back and forth like that. What troubled me about it, and the reason that I decided to take it from a news story to a story that I did commentary on, is because President Trump was so explicit in saying, I'm moving it out of Colorado because of your mail-in voting. And he suggested that Colorado's elections are rigged because we have mail-in voting here, when in fact we have a mail-in voting system that is considered to be the gold standard around the country, developed by Republicans and Democrats together. It's a system that is run by our county clerks. Our Democratic Secretary of State, who oversees elections, she's a dam. You'll see her on MSNBC all the time, whatever, and speaking out against Trump. But she's not running the election. She doesn't have her hands in those. Our county clerks are running the elections. Guess what? Even in a blue state like Colorado, the majority of them are Republicans. The majority of our county clerks are Republicans. They're the ones running the elections. You talk to those Republicans and they'll be like, there's no evidence to support what the president's talking about. But when he said, I'm willing to move a military installation, a military command, because I think that your state elections are rigged because of mail-in voting, he was tying together his domestic political agenda with the military. And what I said was, this is not the first time that he's done this, right? This was back when he was first starting to send the military into Dem-run blue cities and that kind of thing. And again, tying domestic politics with the use of the military. And I point out to the audience, like this is not a red-blue issue. This is like a basic American thing that this is a dangerous thing to do. And what I encourage folks to do is think about what you would call this if it was happening in another country. You would call it authoritarianism, which I think is something that people might have been a little taken aback to hear on their local news. But again, I'm talking about an issue that is rooted in Colorado and what the president is saying without evidence about Colorado's voting systems. And it's what I believe to be true. If we were seeing this in another country, we would call it authoritarianism. That to me is, as a journalist, I use this test all the time. Just flip where something is happening and evaluate it through that lens. Democrats doing something, great. Pretend it's a Republican doing it. How would we talk about it? How would we view it? And vice versa, Republican to Democrat. It's a great thing to do with sports too. I was at the Broncos game last night, and there's some penalties called on the Bengals I wasn't real sure of. And you just play that game. Switch the jerseys. Is that a foul? Is that a foul if you switch the jerseys? And with Space Command, I just looked at it and I said, if this was happening in another country, a local newscaster or a national newscaster would not hesitate to say, the authoritarian president of Hungary did this, to use the military for domestic political aim. But I think a lot of people in journalism hesitate to say that about what we're seeing here. And I think in general, journalists we are constrained by what we have known in the past. And that often means that we lack the vocabulary to speak clearly to what we are seeing now.
Well, as far as that game, I would say switch the jerseys. Would you watch this? That was the worst. That was if you are not a Broncos fan, that was not anything that can classify itself as entertainment. Let's just say that.
Well, I will say, that game was in hand early. But I will also say, you take last year out of the equation, and Broncos fans have watched a lot worse football over the last 10 years. So that's fair. Last night was okay.
That is fair. Now, granted, journalists, at least journalists of your stature, hold themselves to a level beyond just people creating content, but certainly beyond knuckleheads just commenting on things, right? So to the extent that we can try and take the temperature of citizens of America, which I know is difficult because social media is just a minefield. What you just talked about, switch the jerseys, how would you react? Just on a fundamental level, is one of the most underutilized, and I won't even say underutilized. People just refuse to acknowledge how they would react if the shoe was on the other foot. And one thing we saw when it comes to the free speech conversations we've been having over the course of the last week or 2 weeks, there's always a tweet, there's always a video. We know exactly how you would react if the shoe was on the other foot because you said it. And yet that still doesn't stop you from pushing whatever agenda you're trying to push. As it relates to us moving forward, I think that really creates a huge impediment in trying to heal, if you want to call it that, this huge divide that we had, people's inability to accept that fundamental fact of how they would react had the shoe been on the other foot.
Yeah, I think that you use the word heal, or whether you want to call it, progress, or, tying people back together, it starts with acknowledging facts that are not helpful for your point of view. That's what I beg people to do all the time on the news, is to acknowledge inconvenient facts. When I do a commentary that's dinging the governor, I'm not talking to people who don't like the governor. You're baked in. I'm talking to people who like the governor. When I do a commentary about Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, I'm not talking to people who dislike Congresswoman Boebert. They already dislike her. I'm talking to people who might like her style, and I'm appealing to their values to say, is what she's doing really in line with your values, or vice versa? Is the governor really doing what's in line with his values? To me, the path back is accepting facts that are inconvenient for your point of view and telling folks on your own side, hey, that's not cool. That's not what we do. That's not what we're here for. You bring up the corrosive aspect of social media. Right now, social media feels like it's like that scene on the schoolyard where like you got a couple people, or maybe two groups of people are kind of facing off, and it's like, is this going to be words or is it going to be hands? And there's a bunch of people ringed around him yelling fight. People who don't plan to fight, they want to watch somebody else fight. And that to me is what social media sounds like now. It's a lot of people yelling at other people to throw hands when they're actually not in the ring. And as we have seen with the rise of political violence, we're not just talking about throwing a couple of punches on the schoolyard. Like we could be talking about catastrophic stuff that people, unless you have lived outside of this country, people do not comprehend what they could be wishing for. And the idea that we would allow the loudest, angriest people on social media to kick something off, the likes of which we have never seen, is a very scary possibility to me. And that's another thing that I've tried to talk about on the program, to the extent that anybody in Colorado, gives a crap what I've got to say. But, some people do because they watch the show, to just appeal to people to turn down that temperature and realize what you're wishing for. Realize what you're wishing for. And for the people that say, oh, we're already there, man, we're already there. No, we're not. No, some really bad shit's happened, but nothing like what we could see if it pops off the way that a lot of people running their mouths want to see it pop off. So I just encourage people to be measured about this. I was talking about this on the show the other day. I think people on the American right tend to love the founders, right? And, the founders, there's a lot of wisdom in what the founders did. They were also obviously like deeply flawed dudes, right? Like anybody who's remotely cracked a history book understands that, right? But to me, I talked about this on Constitution Day, which I'm not sure I knew was a thing, popped up on my Google. But I talked about this on Constitution Day, where it's like, you know what? Maybe there is some common ground around respect for the founders, which I understand is not universal. But if you try to separate sometimes people's actions from their deeds, I pointed out something that Ben Franklin said at the end of the Constitutional Convention. So he was an old man. He was like 81 years old. They're carrying him in on a salon chair because he could barely walk. And last day he gets up to speak, and it's all about, are you going to vote for, or are you going to vote against ratifying the Constitution? He's so old and worn down that he can't read his speech, but he hands it to another younger man to read. And the entire speech is the line that people know from it, if they know any of it, is that he encourages people to ratify the Constitution despite its faults, right? So he acknowledges that the Constitution is a flawed document, and he encourages people to vote for it despite its flaws and despite its compromises, which obviously we know now was the issue of kicking the can of slavery down the road for 2 generations until a country came to war about that. And you can say that was the wrong choice in the moment. You also have to look to see, like, was abolition like a possible goal at that convention? But that's one of the things that Franklin's talking about, right? Because Franklin went from owning other human beings to being an abolitionist, right? So he had moved in that spectrum in his lifetime. And his speech to the other founders at the convention was saying, as I have grown older, I doubt what I think more and more, because I have watched my mind change, and not on small things, but on big things. And he encouraged them to have a little doubt in their own certitude. And that was the message that I took to our audience in Colorado, of like, everybody's running real hot and real fiery right now, and everybody's very certain. But like, this old man, this founder, who had gone a complete 180 on one of the most consequential issues of his time, appealed to his friends and colleagues to have a little doubt in their certitude and to try to find common ground with other people, to have some humility. And I hope that that's something that I'm able to better practice, that I'm able to better model, and to encourage other people to do the same. Because this like my way or the highway, like we're going off the side of the bridge, right? That's just that's ugly business. And it does not mean excusing people who dehumanize other people or who use violent rhetoric, but it is understanding that not everybody is your enemy because they say things you disagree with. And if everybody just falls into enemy camps, there's only a couple of ways that ends. And it doesn't end with an America that we know, right? For all of its faults, it could tear the country apart. And I hope that people understand where I think the stakes are.
There's a fantastic PBS documentary all about Ben Franklin that I highly recommend people watch. That was what you just outlined. I mean, that story that you just told of his evolution and the idea that they entered into the Constitution knowing that there was this issue that they couldn't resolve immediately. And I think the only thing that I would add to that is him factoring in that if they were to try and go to the mattresses to solve it now, that they wouldn't have been able to come to an agreement, and we wouldn't have this country to build upon, right? And to kind of bend that arc. So fantastic documentary about that. So nod to PBS. Imagine that. PBS with some fire content. That's crazy. I don't know how you do it on X. So I don't know how. It's like a different level, people that are able to navigate that right now. I think one of the lines I had this week is X is like 6 degrees of racism. So I might go there to look at one thing, and I got about 6 clicks before I find something so offensive that I have to close the tab. That is X at this point in time. How? Like, I don't know how you do it.
I mean, my job is to talk to people, and you got to talk to people where they are. Now, that's not to say that any journalist has to stay on a platform, or anybody has to stay on a platform where they get abuse and threats and that sort of thing. I've decided to hang in despite getting those things because I find it's a place to talk to people. I also think that there is value in people, especially those that have some kind of a profile in the community, of saying directly back to some of this most vile garbage, like, I see it, I'm going to hold it up for everybody to see, and it has no power over me. It has no power over me. Not going to threaten me out of the arena. Not going to do it. I will say I was really disappointed in some of the feedback to my commentary, the one that we discussed earlier about turning down the temperature and about the idea that, like, you meet speech with speech, you don't meet speech with violence, and put the same commentary up on X and on Blue Sky. And on Blue Sky, not everybody's reaction, but a good number of people were like, "You fool, Nazis must die." And on X, people were like, "You fool, you should die." I was like, wow. Well, this has been a productive conversation. Well, damn, That was a great use of my Wednesday. But you know what though? Those are the people standing in a ring around the rest of us yelling fight. Mm-hmm. And it's our choice whether we fight. It's not their choice. They're the people who are heckling from the outside because they want to see blood. And I think we just got to keep that in mind. And I actually posted about the reactions that I heard to that and how discouraging it was. And the number of messages that I got, private messages from people that said, "I'm with you, man. I just don't want to talk publicly. I'm with you. Just stay after it. Like, I'm with you. Like, just stay after it. So we can't assume that the people talking or the people talking loudest represent any kind of majority. We also, we can't be naive to the forces at work in society right now. But I think we talked about this earlier. I think we're at a dangerous point when we project upon our neighbors the worst of what we assume of the most powerful people in the country. well, my neighbor loves AOC, so she's got to be some commie. She's got to want to do this or that or whatever else, or not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something that AOC resonated with her, and that's the reason why she likes AOC. Well, my other neighbor wears that red hat. He's a Trump guy, so I bet you he wants to like round up a bunch of immigrant families and whatever else. Maybe or maybe not. I don't know. If you talk to him, there's a chance that he doesn't. So I think, it's one thing to judge public figures in that way. I think when we start to judge our neighbors that way, then that's when we get into really difficult territory, because that's when we start to dehumanize the people that we have a ton in common with. You live next door to somebody and you have completely divergent politics. You still have a ton in common with that person just due to proximity and shared interest. Mm-hmm. And I think, to get back to what we talked about with local media, I think that's where local media has a role to remind people of how much they have in common with their neighbors, even if they disagree with them, because otherwise stuff starts to come apart at the seams. So that's why our commentary, instead of reinforcing the red meat, blue wave kind of thing back and forth that you see on cable news, it tries to reinforce for people, I bet you like 80% of us agree on this. And like what the governor's doing is not cool. Like, what Lauren Boebert said the other day, no, that's not it. That's not it. I think 80% of us, if we were being honest, take the jersey off, would agree. Like that's the stuff that I appeal to. And with the microgiving campaigns that we talked about, one thing that we've proven through almost 300 weeks of doing that is that Coloradans will give into communities that they do not live in, that they do not visit, that they don't know. I'm talking from the most rural of small towns to the heart of the city, that folks will give into communities just because they want good for their neighbors. They want good for other people. We have proven this week after week. I was so terrified when this thing started up. I was like, well, if I do something that's real localized, in some farm town out east on the plains, are people in the city going to give to that? And they did. And then it's like, well, and now I want to do something, there was a program for farmers, for mental health of farmers that got the federal funds cut for it. And it was at a time when a lot of that stuff was really politicized with the federal government cuts. And I was like, well, I don't know, are people in a majority blue urban area gonna give to that? Oh, they absolutely did. And it's like, well, okay. And then how about, the next week we want to do, a violence interdiction program for young men in Denver and Aurora in the heart of the city. Will people in the suburbs and out beyond that give to that? They absolutely will, because people care about their neighbors more than we're led to believe on social media.
One of the things you talked about with the people encircling the ones in the arena yelling fight. I think those that actually have some power, right? Those public figures that are engaged in the incitement of the things that people, if they really think about the ramifications of which would be catastrophic to so many, the lack of accountability for inciting that, I think, has been one of the most problematic things for me. Not for the trolls and not for the bots, but for the people with check marks who go on Capitol Hill or who own companies, right? Those are the people. It's that incitement of the people in the arena that is the most problematic to me. Not just the incitement, but the fact that it comes with zero consequences. The idea that you're willing to put so much pain for so many on the craps table should somebody decide to take you literally and take you seriously. You get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying. And that's something that we've talked about on our program for a while. Beware people who divide for power and profit. Power and profit. And interestingly, now it seems like power and profit are more intertwined, more obviously than they have been in a long time, right? And you see it with people in official positions. You see it with influencers online. You see it with the way that social media algorithms reward rage as opposed to thoughtfulness. It's such destructive stuff. And it starts with everybody on their own team disincentivizing that behavior for folks on their own team, which is also why we talked about how important courage is right now. It's a bad time to be a coward. It's a bad time to be a coward. Like now's really the time where we could use some more people to not be cowards, and to just say, hey, listen, like we agree on 80-90%, but that thing that you're doing, no, you don't have me if that's what you're doing. And that could be politics. You take back to the journalists we talked about, when you're handed something to read because the company decides that that's the message that they want to send out. Bad time for cowardice. Good time to say, no, I didn't work my entire life to build trust in this community, to have it manipulated in this way. No, I think I'm just going to try to keep telling the truth and be accurate, and hopefully that pushback will start to incentivize different decision making, right? With the hopes that that we get to more honest and trustworthy places. But at the very least, at the end of the day, like I stood for something. Like I wasn't just led. I stood for something, and people don't need to make a big show of it. I mean, send that email to your representative who you're with on a bunch of stuff, but you didn't love the way that she did that or the way that he did that or whatever else. Like they're getting a lot of pressure from a lot of places, right? People in public life are getting a lot of pressure from a lot of places right now. But be that person that sends that private message, like those folks who wrote to me and said, not everybody wants this to pop off into civil war. Stay the course. Be the person that sends that message and to encourage some of that accountability. Because, I think the bounds of a lot of things in our society and culture are being tested right now, right? The bounds of government power, the bonds of like our social fabric and the way that we connect with each other, the bounds of the way that people feel comfortable talking to each other are being pressed. And then finally you get to that point of violence. Right. And the violence that starts when speech ends. Nope. More speech. Lots of speech. I'm
going to try and get you out of here because one of the things I like to have an hour so that people actually want to come back and they don't remember it. That ruined my day. So two things that I had to ask you about on your way out. One thing that I know is a fast developing story was my girl Regina's in here. She sent me a link about Tina Peters and about some reports coming from her conditions in prison and whatever is going on. Is Tina Peters getting out of jail?
I don't know. I've asked the governor a bunch of times, is Tina Peters getting out of jail? And he insists no, justice is not for sale. He would be the one to spring her loose because she's in on state charges. Trump can't turn her loose because she's in on federal charges. Now, you'll hear some folks in MAGA land say, well, they could declare her to be involved in some kind of federal case and they could yank her out of state prison and put her in federal prison and they could turn her loose from there. But that seems like that would be headed for a court challenge is highly unlikely. No, I mean, the path to turning her loose is convincing the governor of Colorado, a Democrat named Jared Polis, to do it. And he has repeatedly told me that he's not going to do it. Now, that said, you do see, you talk about her conditions in jail, you do see some people trying to work the angle of like, oh, she's an old woman, her health is failing, like she's in trouble, like to get like a humanitarian parole. And the governor said, like, hey, I'll look at a humanitarian parole case just like I would for any other person. But that said, I mean, she's healthy enough to continue to do all of her media appearances, right, and continue to do all of that stuff. And I mean, she is an older woman, but she was not in particularly ill health when she went to prison. So I mean, if she were to get out, it feels like it is on those humanitarian grounds. But Trump has directly pushed Colorado on this, has threatened to withhold funding, and has tried to pull a couple of levers. And I've directly asked the governor, like, if it means Colorado is losing federal funding in order to keep this woman in jail, he's been resolute and said she stays in jail. Again, if anybody wants to learn more about the Tina Peters case, you can find me on the social media, but go into that X swamp and just search my name, Kyle Clark, and Tina Peters sentencing, and you'll find my thread from the day that she was sentenced. I was blown away that she got 9 years. And I have no way to prove it, but I bet you she was going to get one until her sentencing started, and she started running her mouth to the judge. She threw up a PowerPoint. She's talking about how she'd do this again and that again, and call.
Don't forget the magnetic mattress.
Oh, she wanted a magnetic mattress to sleep on, and I think I said, or at least I thought, and now I'll say aloud, ma'am, the meter is running. You started at 1 year and the meter is running. And she went for like 45 minutes, at which point the judge is like, you are as unrepentant as any criminal I have ever seen. You get 9 years. And I think a lot of people, including myself, were like, holy crap, 9 years. But you have an opportunity at these sentencings to be like, you know what? I made a mistake. But she doesn't believe that she made a mistake, right? She thinks that she was going to find Donald Trump's evidence of vote rigging, which she didn't find. But she is completely unrepentant about it, and she attacked the judge personally and went on for 45 minutes, and then she got popped with 9 years. I mean, that's some wild stuff.
When it comes to art, I got Eddie Murphy Raw. I got Dave Chappelle's Killing Them Softly. I got Bring the Pain from Chris Rock. And the Tina Peters judge sentencing, just from beginning to end, And then at the end, when they were like, "Is there anything else?" They were like, "Oh, I think you forgot some more time, Judge." It was like, "Oh, I'm right. You're right. I forgot about there was another charge. It's another 18 months on that charge." Like, bro, that was incredible.
You're exactly right. He was one of the prosecutors who was like, question about like 3 and 4 there. And he was like, oh yeah. There's another year. There's another year and a half for you. No, I mean, that was some wild stuff to see, but you have to understand, this is a woman who went from being on just like the fever swamp fringes of Colorado politics, somebody who couldn't even win a Republican primary for Colorado Secretary of State to help oversee elections. She went from being like too fringy for a state party, too fringy for her county party. The Mesa County Republicans are done with this woman. They want nothing to do with her. They think that she's humiliated their county. Too fringy for the local guys, too fringy for the state guys. But now Trump has taken up her case personally. Also fascinating, just because you brought up Lauren Boebert earlier. She was in some of the same political circles as Lauren Boebert, because she's in Lauren Boebert's original district. And in fact, a close ally of Tina Peters, a woman named Sharona Bishop, who ran Boebert's first campaign. So like they had some linkages. As Tina Peters kind of, took this turn, Lauren Boebert washed her hands of her. She walked away from her. Lauren Boebert said, I'm done with you. I'm not doing it. And then Trump embraced. And then hold on now, but wait this way. Then Trump embraced her. So now Lauren's back with her. So now she's back on the free Tina bandwagon. So this is a woman who was considered too politically odious for Lauren Boebert to associate with, even though Lauren Boebert's, she's solidly on the right fringe of the Republican Party. But then once the orders came in from President Trump, no. She's our girl again. She's one of us. Now Boebert's back with Tina.
You can tell I'm talking to a journalist because you literally transitioned into my last question, which was about Lauren Boebert. Now, here's the thing. As despicable as it is for me to see a woman that had to pass the GED, had to take the GED multiple times to criticize another woman with a law degree and call her a DEI as a black woman, as despicable as I find that to be, and many other examples when it comes to Lauren Boebert. So there's that part of it. There's the other part of it where when I watch, I think when they went to go, a bunch of Trump supporters, Byron Donalds and Luna from Florida, and Boebert came with them to go support Trump and his court case, and they were all speaking out about it. And then she tries to speak up at the end, and they all just leave as she's trying to speak up. When I see her talking about how she thinks that he's sleeping, or she thinks that he's praying, rather. She thinks that he's praying when he appeared to be sleeping. Huge placards being held up in Congress of Trump sleeping. She thinks that he's praying, but he's pretty when he sleeps, I think was one of the things that she said. I have called Lauren Boebert my favorite Maga for quite some time, because there's an aspect of her that is almost like a 90s movie of a woman just getting plucked out of society and put into Congress. Lauren Boebert is like if I just opened up my mail today and they were like, oh, you get to go to Congress for a term. And I just go with my level of preparation now to go be on Congress. There's something there's something about, like, I don't know why. I'm just fascinated by this woman. So here's my thing.
She's enormous.
Yes. What is, on behalf of the voters of Colorado, because I have said so many times, as much as I appreciate her being here in DC, I do have to wonder, like, what happened? What is the pro-Boebert case from the people in Colorado? Like, one of the things you said earlier, if you're doing a video about Lauren Boebert and it's critical, then you talk to people that are pro-Lauren. What is the case? What I need to know.
She is the distillation of MAGA politics. When she was first running for Congress, she ran in a Republican primary against a guy named Scott Tipton, who no one has heard of, which is fine. Scott Tipton, who was the co-chair of the Trump campaign in Colorado. She ran against Scott Tipton, saying he was not Trumpy enough. She told me the day after she announced for the race that she wanted to go to Washington and fight with AOC. That's what she told me. And I said, well, are there any votes that Scott Tipton has taken that you disagree with? You're running against him in a Republican primary. And she said, well, I turned on the TV and he wasn't running the committee hearing. Maxine Waters was running the committee hearing. And I was like, well, yeah, that's because Democrats hold the majority. That's why she runs the committee and he's not running the committee. Trading you for him doesn't change the math in DC. It would be you sitting there while Maxine Waters runs the committee. And I genuinely believe that she did not know that. Wow. And I think that there are a good number of folks in Colorado. And listen, people who are politically engaged and who live and breathe this stuff and are interested can be like, how could you send somebody to Congress who doesn't know this stuff? I think that a good percentage of the population found it refreshing that she wasn't a know-it-all. And she was like, send a regular person to Congress, send a mom, send a restaurant owner, send somebody who loves guns and is all about that. Send me. Yeah, I don't know everything about how it works. I'll figure it out. I mean, I will say this. She's learned a hell of a lot since she's been there. She knows how Congress works now, but she was clear from the beginning that she knew how to get attention and to use it for her political benefit, which also happens to be her benefit. And she remains very good at that. And I think there are people, and I don't think that this is constrained to MAGA or the right, who don't just want their people to go and vote and go home, but they want them to cause a ruckus. Okay? Mm-hmm. Right now, the longest serving member of Congress in Colorado, Diana DeGette, she's in the safest blue seat in the heart of Denver. She's been in there 20 plus years. She's getting primaried by a cannabis entrepreneur and University regent named Wanda James, who's considerably more progressive than she is, but mainly has said, we need a new face of Democrats. We need somebody who's not just going to sit in a safe seat and take the votes, but be loud, right? Be loud, do things. And I think that Lauren Boebert also does that. She doesn't just sit in a safe seat. She's loud. And I think that there are people on the right who really like that. Now, I would note, she had to move herself clear across the state to find a safer seat. She damn near lost her seat. I don't think that she would have lost it again, but I think she.
You think she would have won had she stayed?
I think she would have won. Okay. But I think it would have been tough, and I think what she saw was nobody was voting for her based on her knowledge of Western Slope issues in Colorado. No, they were voting for her because she's a loyal vote for the president, and she's a magnetic personality. She gets attention. And so her saying, well, I'm going to move clear across the state to the Eastern Plains, the eastern side of the state, and represent them move to the safest Republican seat. That turned out to be a really smart decision. And there were Republicans who did not like that decision when she made it. But that was a very astute political decision by her.
I remember she crashed out and attacked the Uniparty. I remember her going crazy when, when Ken Buck bailed. I remember her going crazy and calling it an attack on her. Yeah.
Yep. So she's now an astute political operator as well. And she is the avatar of MAGA politics in Colorado. She could never win a statewide election. I'm sure she knows that, but she can win in that congressional district. And that's where she is now. And I also just say, I'm somebody who's been very critical of her for a long time. I've also been critical of the way that the media covers her. And I did a commentary years ago about the fact that we don't know how to cover people like Lauren Boebert and by extension, Donald Trump. That if a politician lies once, we will rake them over the coals. If they do it 10 times a day, we in the media are paralyzed. We don't know what to do. We don't have a form or function to figure that out. And when somebody behaves indecently, says cruel things about other people, just needlessly cruel things, politician does that once, we're going to tar and feather that person. They do it every day. Well, it's their brand. That's him. That's her. It's just what they do. That's the thing that they do. And what I pointed out is not only is that unfair to the public who needs good information about the way that their elected officials are behaving, it's deeply, deeply unfair to every other politician who tells the truth and who treats people with decency. That when we give somebody a hall pass just because they're late every day, then that's unfair to every other student who has their butt in the seat when class begins. And we have not figured out a way to deal with that in the media. We still have not. Donald Trump is still dog walking the media on a daily basis. And Lauren Boebert does it to the Colorado media a lot. And I at least wanted to point out and say, hey, we haven't got this figured out. We don't know a great way to do this. And it's not fair to the public. It's not fair to her constituents. And it's also not fair to politicians who behave differently. It creates an incentive for them to be dishonest. Because it's like, oh, you catch me in a lie once, I'm going to be the lead story on the news. If I lie every day, you're going to ignore me, or you're not going to talk about me as much. I will also just say this because I know Boebert's come up on your show before. You probably talk about her more than I do. I will say, as somebody who's had an interesting relationship with her over the years, we had that first interview that was really contentious, where I kept pressing her on, like, you can't name disagreements with the guy you're running against. You just want to go to Washington to fight with AOC. Like, you don't appear to know how Congress works. Like, we had a very contentious relationship for a while. And then over time, I think she has come to understand and even respect that I have a job to do and that I do it in the way that I think benefits the public. And I think that she feels the same about her job. I think that she believes that she has a job to do, and she does it in the way that benefits the public. I think about there's a Trump rally in Colorado. He came out to Aurora to claim that the city had been taken over by Venezuelan gangsters because they've been causing trouble at some apartment complexes. And he claimed that he had been overrun and conquered, and he was there to liberate the city or whatever. And Lauren Boebert was there, and she spoke. And I was there. I was talking to a conservative radio host that I know that I hadn't seen in a long time. So we were chatting or whatever. Then all of a sudden, the crowd just starts screaming, F you, Kyle, F you, man. And I was just like, well, the radio host goes, holy cow, what the heck just happened? And I had no idea because I was talking to him. What happened was that Boebert was up on stage and she name checked me as being the fake media or whatever and like pointed me out in the media pen. And that's why everybody flipped out. But she does this stuff. And I think very similar to President Trump. There's the stuff that they say and believe, and then there's the stuff that they do that's performative. And she did that. She got this crowd of thousands of people, shouting and mad at me or whatever else. And then she came up and shook my hand. We talked about our families, and she said, "Let's take a picture." Her staff was there. Okay, let's take a picture or whatever else. And she's like, "No hard feelings, right?" And I was like, "No, there never are." Like the way that I cover her so that the public knows what she's doing because she's an elected official or an aspiring elected official. It's not personal. And I think that when she's up on stage before a group of Trump supporters and she calls me out to get everybody worked up and booing, I don't think it's personal either. I think it's performative. I think our politics would be better off without it. But on another level, I also respect the fact that she's the elected official. I'm not. She gets to decide how she wants to conduct herself. And I get to decide how I want to cover it. Each of us have our own choice. But it's not personal.
That's fascinating. And my, it's welcome to hear, but also disturbing at the same time. As somebody who sits in a place that was here in DC that was like actively affected by the ramifications of the performative behavior that comes from so many, right? This is not from so many corners of America. I wish the ramifications weren't personal.
I hear you. I hear you. I also a ton of people watching this right now could be like, that reporter guy in Denver doesn't know his ass from a hole in the wall, and he's getting it wrong. He's doing it the wrong way. Like, that's totally fair too. I guess I'm just saying, like, she's been a fascinating person to cover, and that she's Colorado's Trump. And lots of folks in the national media have reflected on the way that they have chosen to cover Trump. And I try to be reflective about the way that I cover folks in Colorado politics. And I've tried to separate the personal from the performative, but then also understand, right, that when she takes a vote, that has real consequences. When she says something that causes a hubbub in the community, that has practical implications as well. But but that doesn't set me, not even when she calls me out in public, doesn't set me on some personal crusade against her, because that's not my job. That's not my job. So anyway,
I keep getting people posting, you should ask about the Epstein files. Did you do a monologue about the Epstein files or something? I don't know why they want me to ask you about unless you have something you want to drop about the Epstein files.
I don't have them. I'm not in them.
That's good. That's good. That is a good start. That is a really good start. Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time, my friend. Honestly, it was really, really fantastic.
It's a pleasure. There are a few people that I have run into in the business who have unique talent, and you are one of them. And it was cool to be your coworker for a while, and to watch you work from kind of within our sister station. And I love to watch what you're doing now. And you have a voice that matters, and I'm very glad that you continue to use it.
No, I absolutely feel that way about you. I feel so proud when I see whether it's you talking about Space Command or you handling a debate goes viral, which is like incredible to see, and such a level of pride. So really, really appreciate what you're doing. And they were definitely right to point to you as the North Star for what I was working towards. So appreciate that, man. I'll let you go get ready for your show. And where can the people follow you, by the way?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can follow me on any social media platform. I'm on all of them, from the left to the right to the in-between. I'm just Kyle Clark on all of those. And Next with Kyle Clark is the name of the program. If anybody ever wants to check it out, we stream anywhere, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern, every weeknight, 6 p.m. It's a 30-minute program. It covers Colorado, so you're not going to hear me talk about national politics every night. But a lot of what we talk about is how national politics trickles down to the real world and impacts people's lives. So that's what we're up to. And appreciate everybody who gave this a listen. And these are important times. So I'm really grateful for the chance to talk to folks.
Absolutely. Have a good show tonight, my friend.
Thanks, Reese. Talk to you soon.
All right. Shout out to y'all. That was dope. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chernobyl. All socials, Kyle Clark and Next with Kyle Clark program. There you go. Thank you for that, Chernobyl. All right. So let's see. What about YouTube paying Agent Orange $24.5 million in a settlement, another overt extortion? I'm definitely fascinated. We're going to see what the ramifications end up being, Stephen. But yes, I did see that. RSL is Mr. Waters. Love all your live videos. Thank you very much, RSL. I appreciate that. Thank you. Welcome to Paula. Welcome, Miss Sunshine. Welcome, Mira. Welcome to you. David Johnson. Okay. Now they want to come together. Is that because it's affecting them now? So what happens if this all goes away? Do we go back to them being selectively blind? Are you talking about the violence? Is this about what happened at the church? Well, I appreciate it nevertheless, David. I appreciate that. And I believe they will go back to bringing selectively blind. Bring Kyle back. He's our cousin now. Oh, I gotta remember he would have loved to have seen that. I hate that I didn't post that before. Yeah, we'll definitely try and bring Kyle back. And I appreciate you guys rocking early in the afternoon. So as far as the housekeeping is concerned, shout out to the Mod Squad, by the way, keeping everybody in line. We're going to do a premiere a little bit later on tonight. Had I woken up earlier, apparently there's a way you can do a live and then you end the live and it immediately goes to a premiere. That's what I should have done. That would have been nice. That's what I probably should have done. Maybe that might be the Tuesday thing from, moving forward, is to do that. We'll see. But I couldn't get the video ready in time, so it'll have to premiere like in a couple of hours. It might be 6, 7, somewhere around there. But look for the notifications for the premiere for tonight's video. And then probably tomorrow will be a BOGO, but we'll see. It depends on how many I can get shot tonight. But on the way out, I definitely want to welcome Sheila and thank Michelle and thank Ray and thank Nicole. Thank Deshauna. Welcome Lola. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Aracelis. Thank you, Stephen. Welcome, Paula, Miss Sunshine, and Mira. Thank you, David. And another thank you to Deshauna. Again, shout out to the Mod Squad. Shout out to my man, Kyle Clark. And I will see y'all shortly for the premiere. And as always, soak your feet.